Alright folks, we are moving on to Immanuel Kant. Well, we know at this point that there has been an ongoing debate between empiricists, those who think that knowledge is gained through experience, using our senses, using scientific experiments, and the debate has been between them and rationalists, those who believe that knowledge exists through reason, by thinking about it, by using our reasoning skills, by figuring it out, by using logic. Well, this debate is still going on at the time of Immanuel Kant, but he grew very upset that after 2,000 years of philosophy going back to the ancient Greeks. Now, Kant thought about things and he got very upset that after 2,000 years of philosophy going back and forth between these two methods, trying to solve some of the world's most challenging problems, well, philosophy hasn't come up with an argument to prove that there actually is an external world outside of us. Kant went back to that idea proposed by Descartes, right? That ultimate skepticism, where you sit there and you think about how the only thing that I can prove for sure, or that I can know for sure, is that I am a thinking thing. I exist in some way. I don't know anything besides that. And he framed that as, I think, therefore I am. So if that is true, as Kant is accepting, then how is it that no other philosopher has taken any steps past that to prove that there is actually an external world? Well, Kant decided he was going to take on that ultimate challenge, and he accomplished something extremely monumental in the history of philosophy. He said, you know what, I'm not going to jump in on a team. I'm not going to be team rationalism or team empiricism. In fact, I'm going to come up with something new. I am going to combine them together. And he did that in a way that is called transcendental idealism, a new way of looking at everything. It would be unfair to not recognize Kant as a major turning point in philosophy. He can be regarded as a new foundation for modern thought. It's amazing because we've already gone through this situation many times where we say, you know what, at this point it was a major revelation in philosophy and it started a new foundation. Well, Kant has done that again. So the studying of philosophy really is studying these masters of thought, studying these geniuses of their time who continue to build on philosophy that has come before them and somehow continue to start from scratch and start a new foundation for everything that comes after them. So Kant definitely does that. His works are some of the most important in all of philosophical history. But the tricky thing about him is that he's not a very easy writer to understand. He has so many brilliant ideas, but his writings are very, very complex. They're extremely dense. They're not easily approachable by an average person or even someone who knows a lot about philosophy. They're very difficult to read and difficult to understand. So let's just think here again, what rationalism, empiricism are. So rationalism is, the idea that we can believe in using reason rather than experience to gain knowledge. So we don't have to observe things. In fact, we don't have to trust our senses, as Plato said, because they're unreliable. We trust our logic, we trust our reason. Empiricism is disagreeing with that. Empiricists believe that knowledge comes from our experience of objects in the world rather than our reason. Well, transcendental idealism, the new method given to us by Kant, is saying that both reason and experience are necessary to understand the world. Why is it that so many philosophers before have been unable to combine these two things in any way? They think that it's either one or the other. It's almost like they've been committing their own black and white fallacy the entire time, right? A false dichotomy of some sort. We don't have to choose only one or the other. We can do something with both and recognize that there is value in both theories. Now, what is the main idea or concept or observation that Kant made to allow him to realize that rationalism and empiricism are both not enough, that we need something more? Well, he realized that there are some concepts that you have in your head that you couldn't have gotten by simply experiencing the world. So empiricism does not explain this kind of concept. But you also couldn't have just sat down and figured them out either. Neither of those approaches explain some concepts that exist. What does he mean by that? Well, he focused a lot on the idea of space. Not talking about the universe, like going out into outer space, Just talking about the existence of space, the fact that there is something in between me and something else, right? We're not all attached to each other. There is something between us. You might just think of it as air, or what he called it, space. Well, a baby doesn't think about how I'm over here and you are over there, so there must be space between us, right? Nobody sits down and thinks about that kind of concept as a young baby. But you have to recognize that a baby realizes that that exists. It's almost like something ingrained into a human life form recognizes that space exists. How do we know that? Well, if we didn't have the ability to recognize space, that there's actually distance between objects, and recognize that without thinking about it, you wouldn't be able to see or function. You wouldn't be able to exist in whatever this reality is, because it would seem as if you can't see the differences between objects, the distances between them. Imagine you couldn't tell that things were in different places. Well, what would you actually be experiencing? You might just be seeing a blob of things and you wouldn't be able to discern one thing from another. So obviously we have that ability. There seems to be some implicit recognition of spatial reality within us. That's another way of phrasing it. We are hardwired. Maybe it's in our genetics, maybe it's in our soul. Nobody really knows where it comes from, but we have some sort of ability to, as soon as we experience anything, we're already experiencing it spatially. It's just into us. It's like it's some ability that we're born with, right? But is that an innate ability? Is it something that we just have as a skill? What could it possibly be? We can't necessarily explain it fully, but Kant is trying. Right? We're born with the ability to recognize spatial reality. So why is that an important idea? Why do we even care that we have to recognize, oh yeah, well, humans are born with the ability to recognize spatial reality? Well, that is a very key concept, and let's continue. In order to say or even recognize that object is over there, you must already have the concept of space in your head, right? So a baby doesn't necessarily have the ability to phrase that thought yet. A young child might have that ability, but even a baby can see that their parent or loved one is not attached to them, like is in a different place in spatial reality. A baby has no understanding of any of those words yet, but definitely can see or smell or feel the presence of a loved one, reacts in some way to want to be picked up or held, and definitely can show the ability to recognize spatial reality. We don't have to learn that, right? You don't have to teach a baby, hey baby, I'm over here and you're over there, and there's spatial reality between us. You don't have to do that. There's something in us already that makes us understand that concept. We just implicitly know what outside of me is, right? We can feel sensations, we can feel our experience. We know that we're having consciousness of some sort. We're seeing things and experiencing things and having some sort of reality-invoking experience. So we know that there's us, there's something within us, and then we see everything outside of us. We just know that it's there. We implicitly recognize there's things outside of yourself. Imagine if you had zero ability to recognize space and how things are in different places relative to each other. I don't even know if we can imagine what that would be like, because it's just so beyond our scope of understanding and our ability to experience things that we could only really guess what that would look like, right? If you can't see that there's spatial reality, what would that even look like, right? What kind of weird, crazy world would we see in front of us? Would it be an amalgamation of shapes, a bunch of random colors? Would we see, something else on the electromagnetic spectrum? What would it possibly even look like? It would be some sort of a nightmarish dystopia. So what would that world even look like? We have no idea, but we have to recognize that we know that we can understand the spatial reality, because everything that we know in science up to this point, everything that we know in philosophy, makes us recognize this one truth, that we can see spatial reality and understand what it is. If we couldn't, would it be possible to move? Would it be possible to see anything? Would you even exist in the same way that we exist right now? That might be a completely different existence, right? So this funny image just shows that this guy doesn't have very good spatial awareness right now, and that's a problem that we have in today's society because we're always on our phones. It's a lighthearted way of thinking about Kantian concepts. Once Kant realized that we have this ability to recognize spatial reality, he had to figure out why we have that ability. And he came up with a term called synthetic a priori concepts. So obviously he got the a priori from Hume. So you can see how Hume contributed directly to Kant. But he added this word synthetic to it. So he gave this name, synthetic a priori concepts, to those that do not come from experience or reason. So empiricism doesn't explain these kinds of concepts, and rationalism doesn't explain these concepts. They must be some sort of condition of having something unique. And what is it that humans had that is unique? Well, it's this word that we give to our experience. We call it a mind, right? We have a mind that goes beyond the physical brain that we have. It seems like we have much more consciousness and much more intelligence of some sort than other animals. So if you have this concept, this mind, you recognize space. So it's almost like you're just born with this mind. We don't know exactly what that means yet, but we definitely can recognize space, and that's the important thing. Now here's a good analogy for trying to understand, because it's a very technical idea that Kant has come up with. If you know anything about the world of Pokemon, one of the catchphrases is, you gotta catch them all, right? It might be the only objective of the game, right? You're a Pokemon master, you go out into the world and you're trying to catch all these different kinds of creatures that we call Pokemon. So you go out into the world, you capture new knowledge like Pokemon with your Pokeballs. So think of the actual Pokemon creatures as knowledge in the world. The different ideas out there that you want to grab in your Pokeballs and actually keep them for yourself as a Pokemon master. You want knowledge, you want to develop your reality in a way that gives you a meaningful life. You want to be intelligent, you want to be not ignorant. So you go out there in the world and try to capture all these bits of knowledge.
It's a metaphor.
So you can experience a lot of things in the world. You can experience food, music, relationships with other people. You can gain knowledge about all of these things. But you always get a few starter Pokemon and some Pokeballs to get you on your way. If you've played the game before, you know that you don't start off with nothing. You start off with something to get you going. That is what Kant is referring to when he thinks of these synthetic a priori concepts. These concepts that we have ingrained inside of us are the starter Pokeballs. We are a Pokemon master when we're born, and we have some of these Pokeballs already so that we can go out into the world and not have to start completely from scratch. We have abilities that will help us in our journey already. So you cannot begin your journey to becoming a Pokemon master until you've picked your starter. Right? Unfortunately, as a human, you're born in a random kind of way. You don't get to choose your parents or where you came from or how. You just come into this world without your knowing. So it's kind of random, but in the game, you get some choice. You get to choose who you're going to be, and that gives you some skills. So you don't really have the choice as a human, but you have to recognize that you have those abilities to start. So synthetic a priori concepts are starter Pokemon. You have them already before you start learning about the world in any other way. So you see how Kant has gone beyond empiricism and rationalism. They might have said that, you know what, you're born with innate knowledge that helps you in the world, or you're born with nothing and you have to just start from scratch and learn all the knowledge after through your experiences. Well, Kant says there's something even before either of those things. There's things you're born with that are synthetic a priori concepts. Your starter Pokekit, your starter tools that allow you to go out into the world and actually experience reality in a sensible way, in a way that makes sense. We know that Kant thought that space or spatial reality is one of those synthetic a priori concepts, but he also said that about another thing. So we've already learned how Kant viewed space as one of these special a priori concepts. He believed the same thing about time. Humans naturally recognize that time exists. A lot of people say, well, time is a human construct. Yes, but what do we mean by that? Well, I think that we can recognize what we call time, or Kant said this, it's because we have an a priori understanding of substance. We can't see time, right? Try to actually take time and put it into a container and say, this is time. Well, you can't do that. You can only use devices, use tools like clocks and watches to measure the passage of time, but how do we actually measure it? What are we actually doing to recognize that time has happened? Well, we experience time through change. Think about how that's true, right? If we see a tree outside with the leaves changing color from green to brown over the season, that is an experience that allows us to see that time has elapsed, that something has happened and then something happened later and there was something in between those two things, that we call that time. So if we know that the leaves started green and eventually they ended up brown, we know that time has elapsed, time has passed. We know that it's taken a while to get to that point. Well, time isn't a physical thing. It's just that recognition of change. If we see something changing, we say, well, time has passed. Although we came up with that concept. And Kant says that time is another one of those synthetic a priori concepts. We understand that change is what the tree is doing in this example. The same tree is green at the start that is the tree that is brown later on. The leaves are brown later, they started out as green. We don't just say, oh, well, that must be a different tree. Like I looked away for a while, and then I looked back and there was a different tree there, a brown tree instead of a green tree. No. We recognize that that's the same tree by using our logic, right? So rationalism is definitely tied in. Empiricism is definitely tied in because we're observing the passage of time. But what is really the key factor here is that passage of time. Our innate ability to recognize that change has happened. We understand the tree is made up of something. There's a substance within all things, and that substance changes over time. Maybe at certain points in history we didn't know what those substances were, right? That we don't know what makes up a green leaf and what makes up a brown leaf and why did it change, but we do recognize that there's something there. There's a substance that's changing, and that shows us time, gives us the experience of time. The green leaf does not vanish from existence and get replaced by a brown leaf that came into existence from nowhere. That would be a pretty wild world to live in if all of a sudden things were popping in and out of existence and we couldn't really understand what was happening. Well, no, that's not what we assume is happening. We assume that there's just a passage of time, the substance of something is changing, and it's still the same thing, but it's changed. Or you can think of yourself in that way. I'm the same person as I was when I was 20 to now. I haven't changed into a different person necessarily, unless you're talking metaphorically. But a lot about me has changed, and same thing with you. As we age, we recognize that time is elapsing and making us into different material things, right? Our body changes, our ideas change, everything about us can change. But we think of ourselves as a grounded same thing, the same person. Time cannot actually be directly experienced, right? You can't actually just sit there and go, I'm watching time. You can't do that because time is related to something that you're looking at. So you have to be witnessing the change of something to actually experience time. But you can't directly watch time happening. Time isn't a physical thing, so you can't watch it happening. It's not a thing, right? Time is a concept. We say, well, time is a thing. We could say it's a noun, but really, as humans, it's just a concept that we've recognized that we have the ability to understand. That we know that when something changes over time, the substance within it changes, we definitely can recognize that. And we say, oh, well, that's just time happening. That's just time passing before us, and time factors into everything in our life, right? A lot of people think that they have to rush because they don't have enough time. A lot of people are bored because they have too much time. Well, what is this time? It's a concept. It's not a physical thing. We experience time through change in other things. We can watch a tree changing over the seasons. We can watch our bodies changing over our lives. We can watch the planets move around if we actually observe outer space. And we can do this for an unlimited amount of things, to watch time happen, to experience time. So there's an image of that, right? That's the exact same tree on the left and the right. One of it is in one season, perhaps summer or spring. The other half is in the other season, perhaps fall or winter. It's the same tree changing over time. It's not a different tree. It is the same tree made up of substance that changes, and we can experience that change, and we call that experience time. It's all these concepts that humans came up with and trying to explain their reality. Now, the idea of time is a very interesting one, and you can examine it in a number of ways. Well, what about this one? The Rutger-Weaver experiment. What happens when you put somebody in isolation? Very coincidental topic for right now, right? When a lot of people are in isolation. So maybe you can actually relate to this. What happens if people are removed from the influence of the sun and from all markers that would let their bodies know what time it is? To show that time is a concept that is kind of mysterious, we can do experiments like this to see if there would be an effect in some way. So you could do this yourself at this point, since we're all doing social distancing, right? Go into a room for a day if you're able to. Try not to keep track of how much time is passing. Don't give yourself any signals, any observing of the sun or a clock or anything that can show you how time has elapsed. And you might recognize some very interesting things. Human subjects had this done to them at one point. This experiment had human subjects put into isolation, into a room where they had no ability to understand how much time was passing. They couldn't see a clock. They couldn't see anything outside. They couldn't see the sun rising. They couldn't see the sun going down. They couldn't understand how much time was passing at any time for an entire month. So what's going to happen? Because today people have so many strong routines, right? We get up at a certain time, we eat at a certain time, we do certain activities at a certain time, everything is scheduled. So what happens if you have absolutely no schedule? How much would that affect the inner workings of your body and your own experience with reality? With no windows, clocks, or television sets, these people, each in a separate room from each other, had no way of knowing what time it was. These subjects extended their sleeping and waking cycles each day without any knowledge of doing so. A lot of people today, they think, oh, I'm on a very good schedule. I go to bed at the same time. I wake up at the same time. I don't even need alarms. I'm just very regimented, right? Well, if you were put into this experiment, the Rutger-Weaver experiment, you would see yourself slipping without even knowing it. You would be extending your cycle, because think about why. This 24-hour schedule that we have, is that something natural that all humans are supposed to experience in that way, where a day is only 24 hours? We do this at this time, we eat lunch at noon, we do eat dinner in the evening, we go to bed at a certain time, and that's what we're supposed to do? Is that natural, or is that just something artificial that we just did as a society because it matches the sun going up, the sun going down? It's built into a calendar system, it's built into a daily work schedule. Maybe it's very efficient, but is it natural for our bodies to want to do that if we take away all of the experiences? Well, what is sleeping? Some would sleep as long as 17 hours at once if they were in this experiment, because they wouldn't have any alarm to wake them up. They wouldn't have any signals to let them know what time it is. So if they went to sleep and they got up when they felt like they were rested, sometimes they would sleep for as long as 17 straight hours, and they would have no understanding that they slept for that long. They could think that they slept for an hour, they could think that they slept for 7 or 8. They had no understanding as to how long they slept. And then sometimes they would stay awake for as long as 30 hours. So when you don't have any experience of time passing, where you can keep track of it, you will see yourself behaving in much different ways than society has you behaving. You could sleep for 17 hours, stay up for 30. Maybe that is a more efficient cycle for human beings. But how could we possibly do that for society? It would make everything break down that we want to do. So we wouldn't necessarily want this to happen in our society, but to recognize that does happen naturally is a very interesting thing to realize. So without any objects to give people a reference of time, the way people organized each day was vastly different. Right? They might be having lunch at 10 o'clock in the evening, or they might be doing something else at a very random time compared to how we schedule things. They didn't have a concept of time. They didn't have anything to look at to recognize that time was passing in a certain way. So they just did things the way their body made them respond. Whenever they felt tired, they slept. Whenever they felt hungry, they ate. There was no regimented schedule. It was all just how they felt in the moment. So try to imagine that, right? That is a very interesting experiment to show us how there's very key ideas linked back to Kant, and how he is showing us that we have this ingrained ability to recognize spatial reality, to recognize time, but we definitely need reference points. We need markers in our existence, to see them, to witness them, to feel them, to experience that passage of time, to experience spatial reality, we definitely need things in our reality to make us behave the way that we do. And if we take ourselves out of that regimented society, out of that existence that shapes the way that we do things and on what schedule, things change dramatically. So what does that mean? It's a philosophical concept, a psychological concept, a concept about reality that not a lot of people think about. So why do we even care? Right? Is this interesting? Is it not? Is there something important that we get from this? Well, this demonstrates that time is a human construct, and it actually disappears when our experience changes. All of this experiment, all the ideas that came from it, all of the results from witnessing human behavior in this experiment supports Kant's claim. It's basically a modern proof that Kant was right, that time cannot be experienced. If you take away all of the things in your life that make you have the ability to recognize time, you no longer will be able to experience it. You won't be able to stay on a schedule even if you try your absolute hardest to eat at a certain time, go to bed at a certain time, keep your cycle of 24 hours going, a day schedule. You won't be able to do it if all of your reference points are taken away from you. What does that mean? That's kind of a mind-blowing thing to realize. Well, let's think about the results. At the end of this experiment, subjects often would be astonished to find that the month was over. Because according to their own calculations, right, if you're a person in there, you're going to try your best to calculate the days, right? You're going to, like a person on a desert island, stranded somewhere, you're going to count the days and see how long you've been in there, just for interest's sake. Well, based on their calculations, based on their sleep cycles, they thought they'd only been in isolation for about 2 weeks. Some thought it was maybe 3 weeks. They were convinced that 30 days had passed only after being shown newspapers that appeared to be from the future. So imagine coming out, like we've seen movies and stories like this, right? Like TV shows where people are shown something and they think they're in another year, maybe like a time travel movie or something, and they're absolutely shocked. Maybe they've been in a coma and they're shocked to realize how much time has passed, because if you aren't experiencing time consistently over every day or even, some sort of relevant cycle of a weekly experience, you don't know what's going on. And it can actually create a trauma within yourself to recognize that so much time has passed you didn't even know that you've been in there for a month, and it felt like 2 weeks to you because you had no reference to time. And so you felt a lot less time passing than actually did. It's almost like you time traveled within your own experience, but you actually didn't. It's just the fact that everything to give you the ability to experience time was taken away from you so that you couldn't stay in that schedule. You couldn't stay in that reality. In essence, you were in a different reality. So that is a pretty cool thing, right? Just thinking about the passage of time. If you have reference points taken away from you, you can't actually experience time in the way that most people do, because society forms a construct for us that keeps us on a schedule, keeps us on a path, keeps us on a plan for the purposes of society to function properly. If you were experiencing a different kind of reality where you were locked away and you can't see any reference points, you would not be able to keep hold of time. Time would be gone, it would no longer exist for you, and you would experience it in such a different way that you could come out of that experiment thinking that you have time traveled. Now, all this has been pretty interesting so far, maybe even kind of confusing, but here is the really important part. Kant thought that some concepts, like space and like time, are built into you as a condition of having a mind. So what does that mean? You have to understand that sentence right there. Space and time are concepts that are built into us. Think of us as some sort of a creation, like say a car. A car has certain things built into it. The ability to convert fuel into energy to run. The ability to have an engine. It has certain abilities that were built into it by us, whoever designed or created that car. We're not necessarily saying that humans are designed, but we are recognizing the fact that we have conditions built into us as well. We have a mind, whatever that means to us at this point in time, which allows us to have the skills or the recognition of space and time. You implicitly experience spatial and temporal reality. You don't have to practice these skills, right? Like most skills in life, you have to practice them and develop them and hopefully improve them. These things are already there. They are implicit, which means you don't even really recognize them at certain points, like when you're a baby, but you can think about them later on when you have more conscious awareness. So we have spatial ability, we have temporal reality. When we reference things changing, we can understand and experience time. When we see objects in the world, we have spatial awareness. These are simply true things to say about what it's like to be a human. So the first thing that we have is spatial reality. You can simply just call that space. You recognize that things have space in between them and are in different places from each other. Your ability to live and exist in the world recognizes that implicitly. And then there's temporal reality, or the recognition of time. You recognize that time passes based on how things in the world move, whether that's planets, or a tree changing, or your body's changing. It doesn't matter. Things that change, you can recognize. Things that move, you can recognize. Things that age, you can recognize. And that's especially recognizable in ourselves. It's important to realize that we have to experience the world like this. There's no choice of the matter. There's no alternative to experiencing reality in this way. Think of space and time as facts of existence. If you haven't understood anything up until this point, try your best to understand this sentence. Spatial reality, the ability to see the distance between things, or even to recognize that there is space between things, is a fact of existence. If you exist, you have that ability. Temporal reality is the same thing. The ability to witness time through movement, through change, through aging. We can recognize the passage of time as a construct of our existence. We see it happening, and that's just something we have no choice in the matter. If we take away all points of reference, like in that experiment, we can't experience time, but merely by existing, we have to experience time, and we do experience time as long as we do have those reference points. Now here's where your mind might really explode. If we have to experience the world this way, through spatial reality and through temporal reality, we are conditioned so that we have no choice but to experience reality in that way. How do we know that the world is really like this? Kant wondered. We must experience the world in terms of space between things. We must experience the world in terms of how things change or move. We must experience space. We must experience time. But how do we know what the physical characteristics of reality actually are when we are preconditioned to experience them a certain way? That's a very complicated thought experiment. Let's phrase it a different way. How do we know that space and time are actually real? That they exist in the world as we know it, the world of whatever is happening around us, and not just in our heads? It's somewhat like the Matrix idea again, right? We are experiencing something, but it could be coming just from our minds, just from the way that we're programmed. We're programmed to experience spatial reality and temporal reality. But how do we know that those even exist in what reality is? There's this separation between our experience of reality and what reality could be. Reality could be a completely different experience if we had different conditions that weren't spatial reality and maybe weren't temporal reality. We could experience the world in a different way, and then we would know something different about experience. But right now we only have these two programs that allow us to operate in reality. So how do we really know what reality is? And Kant would say, we don't. Again, I know this is very tricky, but think about it. Humans came up with these ideas based on how they view the world. We had to eventually recognize and describe, hey, I know that I can move around in the world because there's space between things. That's just a very simplified way of describing spatial reality. Or, hey, I know that, I'm eventually going to die and that I'm this certain age and that tree changes in the seasons. I know all these things because I recognize the passage of time. But we defined what that is, right? We witnessed something, we recognized what was happening, and we called it time. So we did that. We defined these things, how we view the world. We gave them concepts. We did that ourselves. These synthetic a priori concepts are like a pair of magic glasses that you can never take off. Imagine you're born and there's this programmed set of glasses that are built into your eyeballs, right? So think of it like an actual physical set of glasses, just for the metaphor though. We have these glasses on that allow us to see spatial reality and allow us to see temporal reality. Now imagine you could take those glasses off and see the world for how it really is. It would be different than what those glasses are allowing you to see. But we can't take those glasses off, so we can't see what the real world is like. We can only see through the lens of spatial reality and temporal reality. What would the world be like if we could take off the glasses and experience it directly and not through the lenses of space and time? Right? Try to imagine that right now. You don't see spatial reality anymore. You don't see temporal reality anymore. What would you see? That concept should make you think this. Right? It's a very challenging idea for your mind. It's like you're thinking about something that has no answer. That's just this thought experiment that can create so many imaginary scenarios in your head. And it's maybe there is no answer, but it's definitely an interesting idea. In order to make us understand his ideas even more, Kant divided up the world into two separate phenomena. So the first world he called the phenomenal world. This is the world as we experience it due to our a priori concepts like space and time. So the world that we live in right now, our existence, Kant would call the phenomenal world. Everything that we actually see because of our glasses that we wear, our glasses that allow us to see spatial reality, our glasses that allow us to see temporal reality. We see space and time because of these magic glasses, because of how we are programmed. That is the phenomenal world. This world is real to us because of how we are conditioned to experience the world. We think of everything around us as real, all of the objects, all of the space between them, how time is changing things and aging them and moving them. We think of all this as real because it's every waking moment of our existence. But it's only determined by our conditions, our glasses that let us see space and let us see time. Remember, we have these magic glasses on. They make us experience these things. It's like somebody programmed us to have to see certain things, and we can't get out of that, but we just assume everything is real based on those conditions. But maybe it's not real. Maybe reality is completely different. And actually, it is likely that it is very different. The second part of Kant's division is called the noumenal world. The world as it is in itself, independent of anybody's experience. So the noumenal world would be that world that we can't experience. We don't have any idea what it is like. Actually, we can take a lot of educated guesses. We can make assumptions of what the world would look like without seeing spatial reality and without seeing temporal reality and seeing whatever else is there. But we can't ever experience that because we can't take off the glasses. So there's some sort of mysterious realm that is out there, the different aspects of reality that we'll never experience because of our phenomenal world experience. We can never experience this world. That's just a sad fact. We cannot take off our magic glasses. As soon as you experience something, it is part of the phenomenal world. You can close your eyes and try to picture what reality might look like, but as soon as you open your eyes, you are in the phenomenal world. You can't get into the noumenal world. It's like going through the magic cupboard to go into Narnia, right? You just can't go through there because you can't take off these glasses. The noumenal world might not have space. It might not have time. It might not have many other things that are so fundamental to how we experience the phenomenal world. It honestly is just a mysterious idea. It's very likely that there is a noumenal world, something that we can't experience because it only makes sense. There's something there, there is reality, but we can't experience it, so we have no understanding of what it could be. And that is a very frustrating idea, but it is an intelligent idea. It might have space and time. It is possible that there still is space and time in the noumenal world, and we also have it in the phenomenal world, but it's also possible that they aren't there at all. There is no space and time, or there's other dimensions as well, other aspects of reality that we would add on to space and time. There's no way of finding out for sure. There's no way of knowing for sure. So imagine this scenario, another metaphor to try to understand these technical concepts of Kant. Here is a picture of a garden. Imagine the world was only like this. Every garden that you see looks like this. You can definitely describe a lot of the characteristics. I can see the leaves of certain things. I can see rocks and stones in the garden. I can see different decorations. I can see different plants. I can see different shapes. I can see different sizes. This is an interesting world to live in. I can experience a lot of characteristics in this way. And that is my ultimate reality. I've never seen another garden that is not like this. They have a lot of similarities. They have a lot of differences, but they all have a lot of overlap with these characteristics. But now I imagine a different world, a noumenal world that looks like this. A garden with so many other different characteristics. Color, vibrancy. It changes everything. It changes your experience of what that world is. It would be like living in a completely different existence because there's so many other different factors you have to now account for. This is sort of like imagining Kant's phenomenal world and Kant's noumenal world. There is something out there you can never experience. Imagine you could never experience this garden. So how would you ever be able to describe or even know what this garden is like if you had never seen this picture? If we had all only seen the first garden, our entire reality and our entire existence, we would have no way of picturing what this is. But we can by doing this little metaphor. We can see how the color added so much to the reality, and now we can try to imagine how the noumenal world might be so different than the phenomenal world. Here's another metaphor to try to grasp these concepts. We've probably learned a little bit about the electromagnetic spectrum in science class. We know that there is a visible spectrum. That is the range on the entire electromagnetic spectrum that humans can see, humans can witness. And we know that as the colors of the rainbow, right? We know that we can experience all of those colors as long as we don't have any kind of color blindness. But look at how small of an area that visible spectrum takes up on the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Now imagine humans can experience twice that amount, or 10 times that amount, or the entire electromagnetic spectrum. If you could witness all of the different points on the electromagnetic spectrum, your reality would be so different that you probably can't even describe it in words right now, what you would actually see. Your life, your perception of reality would be just infinitely more complicated, so much more going on. Try to think of reality like that. We're experiencing a very small portion of reality based on constraints. We are constrained by spatial reality and by temporal reality. We have to see space. We have to see time. What if there's way more aspects to reality that we can't even recognize because of those constraints? It's very likely that there are. We just can't experience them. Finally, let's think back to one of our class movies. Imagine Neo seeing the Matrix. He woke up from the phenomenal world of what he experienced in his virtual reality, and he saw at the end of the film the noumenal world, because he was some sort of a prophet, some sort of a legacy character that was born inside the Matrix to be able to see the actual code of the Matrix. He now sees what reality is. The reality of his world is this computer code. And now at the end, he can defeat the agents quite easily because he sees the truth. He sees that everything around him is just code, and he, as the master programmer, can manipulate that code, and he can do whatever he wants easily without even drawing a breath. So this is another metaphor for trying to understand Kant's ideas. What if there is this other reality out there, like the code of the Matrix, that we will never experience because we are not Neo? We are all just regular people inside the code of our reality. We are limited by temporal reality and spatial reality. That's all we will ever see. We won't get to wake up and see what Neo saw at the end of the film. But it probably is still there. We just can't get to it.